Hi, everyone, and welcome to C-Suite to Main Street. I'm Jeanette Mulvey, the editor-in-chief of Co., and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Today, I'll be interviewing Cate Luzio. She is the founder and CEO of Luminary, a global networking platform. After 2 decades in banking, Cate launched Luminary in 2018, and in that short time, she's grown it to a 15,000-member organization across 30 countries. She's here with me today to tell us how she started and grew this business and to talk about the importance of networking for all of us. Welcome, Cate. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Jeanette. I'm really excited to have this great conversation.
Me too. So first of all, you founded a company and still run a company called Luminary. So can you just, for those who don't know, tell us what Luminary is, what it does, and why you saw a need in the market for it?
So we are a global professional education and networking platform. We serve 2 audiences, B2C and B2B. So we work with thousands of individuals, entrepreneurs, those in the traditional workforce, those navigating a transition, as well as enterprise companies, which I can talk about a little bit later. And we started in person here in New York City, where I'm based. We were about a year old when the pandemic hit. We went online literally overnight, and that has transformed the business. So hence why we have members now. We're a membership-based community in over 30 countries, 15,000 plus members, and an enterprise reach of over 500,000. So our whole design of the business was to support people where they are. Again, navigating whatever professional path they're on with content, with programming, with education, and with community wrapped around that.
So tell me a little bit more about that. This was not your background. You came from a career in banking. So what made you decide in, I guess, 2018 that this was a need that you saw?
Yeah, so I had a great 2-decade career in finance. Prior to that, I was in startup tech, and before that, nonprofit. And as many people do when they're working inside big corporations, they get involved in their ERGs, their employee resource groups, or their BRGs, business resource groups. And I was heavily involved, if not leading, championing, spearheading our women's networks across 3 of the 3 organizations that I worked for in finance. And what I found was there was a lot of opportunity to connect people in a different way and not just do it in sort of an echo chamber. And in 2018, in addition to running our women's network, which that the firm that I was at, as well as just seeing this explosion of not only startups, but small business owners, and particularly led by women and those of color, I just thought there was a better way to bring people together, again, with a community sort of lens, but through content programming, and really an opportunity to leverage knowledge share and knowledge transfer to bring people forward, to propel them forward. And I've always built community. That's just part of who I am as a leader, as a manager, as a team player. And so I wrote a business plan in 2018 and decided this is what I wanted to do.
So I love this story because it speaks to you saw the need, it was something you were passionate about, you decided it was time to do it. Now, lots of business owners, doesn't matter what industry they're in, have traveled a similar path, but starting a business is expensive, and you did not take on funding initially. You have been quoted as saying you stiletto strapped the business,
Yes.
which is the alternative to bootstrapping. Can you talk about why you decided to self-fund and what the maybe the pros and the cons of doing it that way?
So I'll start with the latter part of that question. I think there's pros and cons, whether you're raising or stiletto strapping, bootstrapping, self-funding, whatever you want to call it. And many founders, business owners will start, it's more than 70% here in the US, will start by bootstrapping and then eventually might raise. So we've always taken the approach over the last 7 years that we've done it through, I started in 2018 with my own capital, and the business has continued to sustain and reinvest in itself over these past 7 years. Why did I do it that way? Once I did the initial business plan, I really said, okay, let's now get down to brass tacks and do the financial projections. What would this cost in order to build it? And I think that's where a lot of small business owners don't do the work. They just say, oh, I don't have any money, or I don't have enough money, I'm just going to go raise. I really wanted to put the model to the test. And so we did our financial projections, and I realized, actually, I could self-fund this for a certain amount of time, give us some runway, get to market faster versus going out and raising for probably at that time would have been at least 6 months to a year, if not longer. And I thought if I could do this myself, it would be a great way to see if it's product market fit, if I can build a profitable company. So if I ever do want to raise, it's going to hopefully be that much easier. Again, pros and cons, right? No matter how and where and from who you take money, there's always strings attached. That I took the money from myself. So, but I had the privilege to be able to do that. And I'm very vocal about that and honest because not every business owner can do that. I spent, 20 plus years in corporate America and saved a lot of money. And that is what I chose to use my capital for and to. But there are always strings when you take that. And so that was my model. And also it allowed me from the get-go to listen to our customer. I didn't have any investors telling me how to build, what to build, how fast to build. I could actually take in real customer feedback, and we still do over and over. It helps us in our programming. It helps us in what kinds of products and offerings we want to put forward to our B2B and our B2C community. And that's allowed us to stay very nimble, especially during the pandemic.
Tell me a little bit more about that this allowed you to listen to your customers. I am not understanding the distinction. If you had funding, why would it be harder to listen to your customers and react to that feedback?
Because at first point, you're listening to the investor, right? How fast they can get their money back. When are they generating a return? And I'm talking about investors versus traditional bank lending. And I fake pitched. So one of the things that I did when I wrote the business plan is I went out into my network, which was quite substantial, and said, hey, I'd love to kind of pitch you my idea. And so I talked to a couple of VCs and a couple of private equity, and I wanted them to poke holes in the model. And the number one thing that they said was, you don't have exclusivity and you don't have an application process. And really core to our mission and who we are is that we don't have exclusivity and we don't have an application process. So to me, that was, if I had gone out and raised, I would have had to likely change the model and the core of who Luminary is. Inclusivity is at our core. And I would have had to probably change who we were going to become. When you hit things in crisis, whether that's cash flow, whether that's the global pandemic, you often have to, when you take money, act in the mindset of the investor or the shareholder versus your customer first. And we've always wanted to take a customer first or a members first, as we call them, as a priority.
We're talking about the choice of whether to self-fund or raise funding as if it's a choice for everyone, but funding is
Yeah.
actually hard to get. So there are lots of people who want to start a small business that getting funding is not even an option. They wouldn't be able to raise capital or even get a bank loan. So for some people, self-funding is the only option.
Is the only option.
So I wanted to ask you, learning what you've learned, if you were talking to someone who had no option but to self-fund and their funds were limited, is there a way that you think about launching a business or even growing an existing business and how you decide how to invest limited funds? Like, is there just a way of thinking about running or starting a business when the funds are limited? Where do you put your focus?
Well, I think you have to understand first and foremost, like, how much money do you have to put towards the business, right? So you can use whatever dollar figure you want. I think most founders that I talk to, and I teach a business plan boot camp every single month. I teach a founder SWAT every single month. And I would say 95 to 98% of those business owners, whether they have a business or not, have never done a full business plan, don't have financial projections. And so in order to figure out how much you actually need to run a business, you've got to go through those exercises. Even doing a basic SWOT analysis for your business, even if you haven't started, is really important. It lays out visually where your headwinds are and where your tailwinds are. The other thing is, I think the media has done business ownership and entrepreneurship a disservice by saying, everything has to go to fundraising through venture capital. And we know, and while we need more funding to go to women in particular and those from underrepresented communities, that's not the only way, and it shouldn't be the only way. And it's probably not the right way. It's a very small percentage of kinds of businesses that will ever be able to take venture capital. There's also, as you mentioned, bank lending, and we think historically in the big banks, right? They're the branches on the street. Well, there's another opportunity, which is CDFIs, right? Community Development Financial Institutions that are required by law to lend to small businesses. They partner and work with large financial institutions. You have crowdfunding, equity-based crowdfunding, rewards-based crowdfunding, grants, and we saw a lot of those during the pandemic. And then there's friends and family, there's angel investing, there's private equity, there are family offices. So I think the other thing is once you've determined how much capital you will likely need in order to start and build this business, then you determine where does that capital come from. Maybe it does come from only you. Maybe you can go into a friends and a family. Maybe you look at a crowd fund or lots of different grant programs. So I don't think it has to be one or the other. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can build a business in lots of different ways, but understanding the baseline of the numbers is so critically important because I hear founders all the time and they'll say, well, I raised $10 million and I have 2 months of runway left. Or I hear founders say, I've taken out of my 401k in order to build my business, right? So I don't think there's a right or wrong way. I think it depends on the business that you're building. I think it depends on what solid financials you have for yourself, how much you're willing. I had a 3-year time horizon as an example. I said, I will only invest my capital for 3 years. I had to only do it for 1 before the business became sustainable on itself. But you need to also have all of these metrics and KPIs and milestones, which I always go back to. Do you have a business plan? And can you determine what is success? Part of that is on really understanding how much capital you actually need to deploy to start the business.
So, right now in this conversation, you're sort of living one of the principles of Luminary, which is this idea of collaboration over competition. So, you've lived this journey and you're successful, and you could keep it to yourself because you don't want other people to build businesses just like yours and compete with you. But that's not what your mantra is. So can you talk to our audience about that idea of collaboration over competition, how you live it, and how it's built into your business model at Luminary?
Sure. And I'll sort of say, listen, I am very competitive. I'm very driven. I'm very ambitious. But I think when you look at this idea of collaboration over competition, collaboration expands the pie. Competition, in my mind, shrinks your thinking. This is why people go down the rabbit hole when they look at their competitors or their peers on social media, because then you start to forget what lane you're in. So I go back to this competition, really, I think shrinks your thinking. If and when you're able to partner, share, support others, my belief is that you create much bigger ecosystems versus silos, and that's where the real growth happened. I use example. When I was starting Luminary, one of the things that people said was, well, how are you going to scale? Are you going to put luminaries in every city? And I said, well, absolutely not. I don't want to have a big real estate portfolio and a bunch of real estate debt. I'm going to focus on New York. That's the market where I live, and that's the market that we are going to serve physically when we started. But in my market research and analysis, I started seeing all of these other incredible, in particular, women leaders starting spaces, physical spaces around the country. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could work together and string together a network of partner spaces where we had reciprocal access or reciprocity in some kind? And we started to do that. I reached out at the beginning to about 10. We now have close to 50 of them around the country and abroad. So when you think about that ecosystem, that actually brings so much more opportunity, not just to Luminary, but to all of these other smaller business owners around the country. That gives benefit to our members of our spaces and our communities because you're providing that reciprocity and that reciprocal access. And it's just a better way to amplify one another. I'm a big believer in there can't just be one woman standing or man standing. We have to do this together. And by the way, I am not a believer in someone taking my ideas or copying my business. I think we all have to stand alone and differentiate ourselves. But I do believe that in the spirit of partnership and collaboration, you can come up with some incredible ideas and incredible ways to support other businesses at the same time you're building yours.
So you're talking about partnership, collaboration. I think all of this kind of falls under the umbrella of networking. And
Mhm.
I am the absolute worst at networking. And I know I'm not alone. I know there are people watching who are also like, oh, yeah, I'm terrible at that. So eh, can you talk a little bit about what makes good networking and like how to avoid it being transactional where it's just like, hey, what can you do for me?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little
So
bit about that?
yeah, yeah. So I will say I do think there is a part of networking that can be transactional in a positive way, and I can talk about that in a moment. But because you brought that up, oh, we hear all the time it's icky, it's awkward. I'm an introvert. Your network is your net worth, right? But it's also not just about how many people you know, how many business cards you've given out. It's really about how deeply you invest in relationships. So I think we need to have a mindset shift and reframe the narrative around networking. This is about relationship building, right? Relationships make our careers, relationship makes our career pathing easier, whether you're building a business or navigating the traditional workforce, whatever you're doing. And we have to focus on building those relationships, building that trust over that transactions. I say all the time, networking, relationships are a two-way street. So if you go into building a relationship with just wanting something, it will fail. You will not build a relationship. You will also, I think, feel even worse about networking. Building those real relationships before you need them is so important. And when I talk about transactional networking, we go to a lot of events, which is amazing. Luminary hosts 20 events a month. You may not develop a relationship with every person in that room, but you may hear someone say something or you may hear a speaker and you may just want to ask them that one question, whether that's a DM on LinkedIn or you may get 5 minutes of their time. Be prepared if you have an ask because most people just don't have the capacity anymore to mentor and build hundreds of relationships. It's just different. You also have tools like LinkedIn that have made networking so much easier. So if you have the right intentions, and I truly believe that you have to think the good in people, have the right intentions as you're thinking about networking, but also remember at the core of that is building relationships. And if you can have that as that baseline, I think that idea of networking and the ickiness and the awkwardness goes away completely.
Okay, I don't want to turn this into like a personal therapy session for me, but I know I'm not alone in this. So I'm going to ask you this question too. I am a person, no matter what group I join, I feel like an outsider. Like I never feel like I fit in and I never feel like I belong. I know I'm not alone in that. So you must have thoughts about the importance of being your authentic self
Mhm.
and figuring out how to make that work for you. So can you, because you must see other people doing that. So can you tell us a little bit about what you think works for people in terms of being themselves?
Yeah, and by the way, I am an extrovert, everyone knows that, but I feel like you, Jeanette. I was at a dinner last night where I felt like a fish out of water because I wasn't in that group. I was sort of an outlier, an interloper. I was a plus one that someone invited. And the way I approach those situations every single time is just show up. Be you, right? It's up to the other people around that table or in that room to also be open to meeting new people. If they are so closed, that's on them. But if you show up, by the way, half the battle is just showing up and being there and talking about yourself, your business, what you do. Have creating a relationship, have that one thing that you might be talking to someone about that's not related to work. Maybe it's complimenting them on something that they're wearing. Build a rapport. And again, I think if you take this idea of I'm networking, because many of us think I've got to network to get something. Forget it. You won't get anything. You will walk away with nothing. You will walk away feeling awkward. You will walk away feeling like that was a waste of time. But if you go in, again, good intentions, showing up, just being there and putting yourself out there, it's not always easy. And sometimes it's baby steps. But again, I feel like it too. And I share that. And people go, but Cate, you're talking to thousands of people. And it's like, yeah, I still feel like some days I'm not in the group. It's why our mantra at Luminary is come sit at our table, because we all have felt that way or feel that way when you're never sure, who do I sit with at that table? Who's going to be my buddy in that room? And the other thing is, most people there are probably feeling the same way as you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You mentioned before that that Luminary serves both B2C and B2B companies. You're open, you're inclusive, you have members from all different backgrounds. Can you talk about, so in the business sense, this adds up to having multiple revenue streams is what I'm
Yes.
getting at. And you have events, you have different revenue streams in that capacity too. Can you
Mhm.
talk about the need to have different revenue streams, how you think about that, and is there any sort of equation that you do before you add a revenue stream?
So first, going through the exercise around ROI, return on investment, I think is really important. Both of return on investment from a financial, how much money are you investing in this revenue stream? How much time and energy, if you have a team, how many people will need to service that revenue stream? And so again, I think I use this over and over. People I get on my soapbox. I think a SWOT analysis is a great opportunity to do. It's very simple. It's very quick, where you can, if you're evaluating whether it's a a stream, if it's you're in B2C right now and you're thinking about B2B or vice versa, if you're thinking about, any different diversification of your revenue, going through those exercises are important because you will quickly identify what you're up against but what also it can add. And I've done that as well when we've acquired companies. It's sort of like, what is the ROI here? And there's lots of different metrics that we use in order to do that. For us, when I wrote the business plan, I didn't want to be dependent on one revenue stream, which was B2C. I also knew in order for us to drive faster, bigger reach and impact, we needed to work with companies. And that's where I came from, right? The reason I started Luminary is because I was sitting in one of those organizations and we were in an echo chamber. It was one organization, one group of people. And so we weren't bringing in different perspectives. And so I knew that having that B2B and that B2C component was a much better way for us to grow and scale. When you are dependent on one revenue source and or one large client, you are at risk. And so whether that's through new innovations, new partnerships, even looking at the industry and how your industry that you're in is changing and evolving, which you should be doing on a regular basis, is understanding where you fit, how you differentiate. And I always go back to this. This is one of the first things I learned as a banker. My first bank, over every door, there was a slogan, think of yourself as a customer. And every morning when I wake up, that is what I think about. What is the customer, in our case at Luminary members, what do they want? From a B2C perspective, those individuals that are paying for membership, and then those corporate members that we're working with that might be paying for a very large number of memberships of their employees and lots of other ways we work with companies. So think of yourself as a customer and always be taking in customer feedback. That's also going to help you determine what revenue streams are going to drive not only financial gains, but also value for the customer.
For you're talking about membership. For people watching today, if they are interested in joining, how can they find Luminary?
weareluminary.com is our website. So just weareluminary.com. And then our Instagram is weareluminary as well. You can find us on LinkedIn and all the platforms, but look up Luminary. And again, We Are Luminary is our big, and we've built our membership model to be financially accessible, to be to remove barriers, and to be very flexible for people's state of life, stage of business, wherever they're. So we have monthly memberships, we have annual memberships, we have scholarship program, we have a fellowship program. And how we've built that is through consistent surveying of our members, our customers, and what they want and where the value is that we provide.
And it's not just for business owners, it's also for
No.
in their careers. So this is a place where people can meet each other if they're in business, but also can be networking, finding customers, finding their next job.
Finding their next job, getting advice about where they're at in their next path, and talking about. We also don't just focus on professional development. We're also very intertwined with personal development, mental health, financial literacy, because we're whole people, we're whole humans. It's not just about our careers and our businesses. And I should have mentioned this in the very beginning. We've always been gender inclusive. Even though I identify as a woman and female, the idea is that we don't get anywhere unless we do this together collectively. And so our mission has always been advancing women and allies in the workforce, regardless of their professional journey.
Great. Before I let you go, my last question is, you started your career working in a bank and then you became an entrepreneur. So what's your advice to entrepreneurs? What did you not know then that you know now that maybe you'd wish you'd known? What's your best advice?
I think if I had known how hard it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it. So a little bit of naivete, I think, is a good thing, because I think if you do too much research, I don't think I would have done it. It is very lonely. It's very isolating. I don't have a co-founder. I have a phenomenal team and I have a phenomenal leadership team, but it is hard. And there is a reason not everybody does it. It's not just about, I don't have the money to fund it, I don't have an idea. It's also a tremendous personal risk, I think, mentally, to be able to keep going every single day when as the founder, as the CEO, as the business owner, everything rests on your shoulders. And I think, again, I don't know if I would have done it if I had known how hard it was going to be. I also don't think I would have done it if I had known a year after starting, having a physical location, a global pandemic would hit. But hindsight 2020, it's the best thing I've ever done. It's also the hardest. And so that risk reward is something that you have to balance every single day.
Well, I think we're going to leave it there. I thank you so much for this interview. It was great.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeanette.
That was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you to our sponsors, Dell, Intuit, Oracle NetSuite, and H&R Block Advisors. Keep an eye out for an email with a recording of this event, and please share it with your networks. We appreciate you all, and I'll see you at the next C-Suite.